Bob Murphy Show, episode 408.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews, conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bob Murphy Show. Man, these crossovers just keep getting better and better. Adam Heyman returns once again, and we are discussing several very interesting clips that he grabbed from a recent episode of the Tucker Carlson show where he had evolutionary biologist Bret Weinstein on. And they covered all sorts of cool stuff, and God, the Middle East, and baseball. So I think you're going to like it. If you like these crossovers, you're going to like this one. Without further ado, here are Adam and myself responding to various clips from the Tucker Carlson show.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Adam.
Bob, I have great news.
What's that?
It's wonderful news. I've been really proud of these little collaborations you and I have been doing for the last several weeks, and our viewership is really growing to the point that, have you ever heard of a fellow named Tucker Carlson?
Yes.
And have you ever heard of a fellow named Bret Weinstein?
Mm-hmm.
Well, those two guys are clearly tuning in to listen to what you and I have to say, because last week we got together and had a riveting conversation about theory of evolution and simulation theory, and like they wanted to dive in and coast in our wake. These two guys get together and they have a little evolution conversation of their own. So they must be listening to us. That's pretty great, right?
I think we show them that it's acceptable, that you can talk about such highbrow issues and not lose the masses.
Trailblazers, heroic trailblazers. That's us. So obviously I'm alluding to a conversation on Tucker Carlson's, whatever you call it, channel, network, his online platform thingy that he had with evolutionary biologist Bret Weinstein, who I am a huge fan of. And you shared this clip with me, Bob, and thought it was interesting for us to dive into and talk about. And boy, do I agree.
Yeah, and let me just preface this, folks, by saying, you should really go watch the entire thing.
Absolutely. We'll put a link in the description, yeah.
Should we play some clips for the good folks?
Yeah, let's play some clips and talk about a very interesting conversation. Let me roll the first one here.
Just want to confess a few of my positions so that your audience knows where I'm coming from.
Okay.
I do not believe that there is a creator in the literal sense. I am in no way hostile to the idea, but I've come to the conclusion that there probably isn't such a creator, because all of the things that we have been able to figure out about the world, things that we know are true because they carry a great deal of predictive power, have come to us through the principle of parsimony. And I will clean up the principle of parsimony a little bit, because the way it was originally formulated is clumsy. But if we had access to all the information, then the simplest explanation for each pattern that we observe would be the correct one.
Right.
Simplicity is our guide to what's true. And for me, the problem with the hypothesis that there is a creator is that it answers one very difficult problem: where did the universe come from? At an expense that is vastly greater in terms of the assumptions, right? If the universe came from a creator, well, that simplifies one thing. But now we have to explain where that creator came from. And that's a much harder problem than explaining the universe itself. So as much as I agree, explaining the universe and explaining biology is difficult, it does not solve a problem to imagine that a creator is the answer. And even if there was one, well, maybe that creator was existing in a universe that was created by another creator, but eventually you're going to get to a place where you're going to have to reach for the only explanation we have ever come up with for where radical increases in complexity come from. So even if we, in this universe, are the product of a creator's work, ultimately that creator is going to have come from somewhere, and the only explanation that could possibly work is going to be Darwinian. So again, I'm not saying that I know whether there is or there isn't, but I am saying that the principle that has allowed us to see all of what we can see, that has allowed us to build all that we have built, that principle is parsimony, and it suggests that this universe is not the product of an intentional creation.
So the Hebrews explained it this way, and the Christians too, that the process is inherent in the description. So the creator is the force that creates and is not himself created. So in other words, God was not created. God has always been there, period.
Right. And I see, you can make the question go away, but I don't know what that means. We don't have any example of such a thing. So
No, we definitely don't, because everything apart from God is created.
A lot there.
Yeah, a whole lot there. You want to dive in first?
Sure. And folks, Adam and I kind of agreed before we started going here that we were going to try to keep our remarks snappy because, we have a bunch of material to get through here. So you might have thought that I was going to dive into like what Tucker said or whatever, but my take on this, Adam, is I'm going to just challenge how Bret started that. He, saying all the things, I don't have the exact quote, all the things we know as true have come through the principle of parsimony or something like that. And he's saying things that have predictive power. And then he said something like, if we had all of the information relevant to something and we found, the pattern that predicted it all, the simplest explanation would be the correct one. And, Tucker just said, yes. And I want to say, no, why? Says who? I mean, I've heard of Occam's razor. I understand the idea that of competing explanations that had the same predictive power, the simplest is preferred. I get that. I'm not saying I disagree, but I don't think I would say that, if you have, a certain pattern and two different theories and and they have equal predictive power, the simplest one is the correct one. I mean, you could contrive some scenarios where, you could predict the simpler, or you could predict the outcome with a simpler thing that was wrong. You know what I mean? And there was some guy that he went through 9 different things and then said the dialogue, and you could say, no, the simplest explanation is that the line that came out of his mouth was the first thing he thought of, when no, actually he thought of 19 different things. And the way around that, like ultimately you'd say, but really if our parsimonious theory is wrong, it's because it would lead to a false prediction eventually. But you can never know that ex ante. So,
Yeah, my ears perked up when I heard that too, and I decided that he was either misspeaking because he had like 5 things he wanted to string together.
Mm-hmm. What would be the simplest explanation of his mistake?
It also didn't make sense that, like, if you had all the relevant information, you hardly would need a theory, right? You just know everything.
Right.
So right. I think he was just trying to make an appeal to our natural intuition that, in general, simpler explanations are more likely to be the truth than more complex ones.
So anyway, just real quickly to finish my take on that exchange. And I like Bret too. I don't know if I said that, to endorse your liking of him as well, but I do too. So if to the extent that it parts in this, I'm going to disagree with him. It's not because, oh man, what a moron. But him just flatly saying that, when I look at the empirical evidence of things in this universe and observations, I don't see any reason to suppose there's a creator, and that would really just sort of raise the question, or would beg it. I always forget how to use that phrase properly.
Yeah.
And to me, that would be like you come into some lady's found dead in her kitchen, and the cops come and the investigators, and she's got, there's blood smeared all over the place. It's, I hate this lady, and there's another term instead of lady, like written her blood on the thing, and they're looking around, and like the simplest explanation is she tripped. Because if we invoked that there was this other killer who, had hatred in his heart for her and maybe as her husband, then that just raised the question, where did he come from? And then we got to explain him. But isn't it just start with what, you know what I mean? And it'd be ludicrous there. And I'm saying for example, all this stuff, and you can challenge this and say, well, no, we have, but prima facie, there's a lot of stuff about like the fine tuning of the universe, and the charge on an electron is in a very narrow band. And if it were one way or the other, then, molecules couldn't form the way they do, and life wouldn't be possible, at least as we know it, blah, 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 blah. Right.
I didn't even notice that at the time, but you're right. I mean, simplicity is in the eye of the beholder, right? I mean, who's to say what explanation is more simple? And Tucker's response was just, well, yeah, I mean, everything was created except God. That's like by definition. Mm-hmm. And at that point, you're like, well, yeah, but we don't understand. We don't have the slightest idea what that could even mean. And I fall more on Bret's side than you probably fall on the other. We're not going to play the clip, but later on in the conversation, he brings this concept up in reference to the many worlds hypothesis that explains quantum theory and how it works. Because there's a great argument: we don't understand what's going on. Is it that, or is it that the act of observing collapses the waveform of probability, and we don't understand that either? And he says, it's real simple. It's just a one-line thing to say, yeah, every time something could have happened one way or happened another, an entire universe is formed, and that solves all the equations. And that's simple to say, but what in the world would that even mean?
Right.
Millions and billions and infinite numbers of universes. What is that? Where? What are we talking about?
And as I recall, Bret didn't like that, right? He recoiled from that saying.
No, he didn't like that at all.
Yeah, and so I appreciated that part too, because that was my take to that. For people who are, hey, we can't just multiply entities, and we're like, that's another part. You want parsimony. You can't just invent a bunch of unobservable, infinite number of alternate universes to explain the current one. That's kind of nutty.
And one of the things I love about Bret Weinstein is he stands right where I do, because in the face of that, which is, we don't know yet. Mm-hmm. There's many possibilities. A lot of them are bewildering to the point where we don't even understand what they could possibly mean. And we just don't know yet. We got to keep trying to figure it out.
Yeah. I had one last comment on this. He did the move that I brought it up the last time you and I talked. Again, maybe I just said it and planted the seed, and then after he watched our performance, he couldn't help himself.
Naturally.
But did you catch him? I was jotting it down. He said something like, and we can, maybe this universe was created, but then they just raised the question, well, who created the God? And then he was created. And he said something like, it's not exactly, but that eventually you reach a place where the only possible explanation that could work is the Darwinian one. And so again, I want to say, okay, fine, but let's stop pretending we're empirical. If you're saying, if I just think about it, it's got to be Darwin, because what else could it be? Okay, just like, human action implies opportunity cost, but don't think you're out there measuring economic laws, because you're not. You just sit and think about it and realize it's got to be Darwin, because what else could it be? Because the way you're structuring it. And you're right, Adam, whereas Tucker's saying, well, the monotheistic traditions, the way they get out of that logjam is they just posit, no, there was this being that always existed, and he created all of the, the universes we know it and time as we know it. And so you say, well, who created God? And you say, nobody. God always existed. So it's not a contradiction, but you say, but I don't get it. And say, well, no matter what we do, we're not going to understand. It doesn't make any sense, but that's how they solve it.
Yeah, two wildly different frameworks, kind of incompatible. And I'm more comfortable with Bret's, again, and the way I frame it is that it might not be Darwinian evolution that is responsible ultimately for the complexity in this world, but it's our best guess so far, right? I mean, we can see that it could work despite the holes in the theory and the things we don't know yet, and informational complexity and not enough time. But even with all those challenges, it's the only thing we know of without positing some unicorn. God did it. Mm-hmm. So if you don't want to adopt that frame, you don't have all the answers yet, and that's fine. But this is the only thing we know that could have done it.
Yeah. I guess my comment on this is it seems like it comes down to worldviews and preconceptions, and yet people think they're arguing and, on a higher level.
Well, what was so beautiful about this conversation is that it was a conversation and not just an argument.
Right. Right.
Two people letting each other see in good faith what their framework looks like and why they hold it. And
all the more evidence that they saw us and they were like, wow, this is possible. Let's try to be like,
right.
They just said, what would Adam do? That's kind of their motto.
Be the behavior you seek to see in the world, Bob, right? All right. I want to play two more clips back to back. It's where they talk about supernatural being the only explanation for particular kinds of evil we see in the world. So look for that. And we're going to play just 2 clips back to back because there was some dead air, sort of, so to speak, in between.
I should say, what I said on Rogan was like characteristically inarticulate and imprecise. And I don't have a problem at all with the idea that there's physical evolution, because I think there clearly is. My problem is with the question of the creation of all things. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's a better explanation or a more reasonable explanation that there's just a God that created everything. If you disagree, I'd love to hear it. But let me just say, of the question of religion being adaptive, so like one of the main modes of religious expression from the beginning of recorded history is human sacrifice, including, and it goes on today around the world in various forms. And the idea that that's like necessary because population outstrips resources is not always true. Like there are tons of examples, including in modern day, lots of places, including the United States, where there's plenty of resources and people do it anyway. But it's the same story in every civilization, none of which could have had contact with each other that we know of. And there's kind of nothing that evolutionary biology can say about that. It's like it's not helping people at all, and they're doing it anyway.
Well, I look at it differently. I mean, I see the same or a similar pattern. And my sense is in biology, when we see a complex, costly pattern that either re-evolves, spreads, or otherwise persists over a long period of time, we are forced to grapple with the question of what could its utility be.
Exactly.
And while I don't think we have a good hypothesis about the utility of human sacrifice, and personally, morally, I'm offended by it, as I'm sure
me too.
You are.
So is God, by the way.
Nonetheless, like so many of humanity's worst attributes, we have to look at it and grapple with the evolutionary implications, that it does have some sort of a meaning.
Believe in the existence of the supernatural. I've experienced it, I've seen it, it's real, it exists outside of nature, outside of all the laws that we think we're subject to, and it acts on us. And human sacrifice is one example of that. So that's my view. I'm totally convinced that that's true. I know that it's true. And so I don't know if there's room in the framework that you're describing for that fact.
Well, what I think I did not articulate properly is I'm not arguing that a materialist scientific worldview that excludes the supernatural is a better way to live. One of the things I think atheists have done particularly badly, and one of the reasons that I don't call myself an atheist, is that there is no demonstrated case in which, an atheist civilization has thrived. In fact, we have many examples in which they have spectacularly collapsed. And in fact, the things that presently threaten our civilization include a great many, atheist ideas, like, you can just up and change your sex if you feel that you're trapped in the wrong body.
There is no God but us.
Right. So that program doesn't work very well, at least not as far as we've seen.
I think that's true.
So I'm not arguing that a belief...
No, but I'm not even... No, I know that you think that, and it's obvious in how you live that you think that.
Oh, there's so much there.
Yeah.
I particularly love right at the end where Tucker, acknowledges the grace of the way Bret lives his life.
Mm-hmm.
You say you don't believe in God, but I see you're, living and acting like a Christian. We share these beliefs. That's kind of great.
Although he could have meant, I see you sacrificing people the way they did in Indiana. Not the last crusade. Temple of Doom was the second one, where a lot of human sacrifice going on in that one.
The heart stayed beating outside of the man's chest, Bob.
Oh, Nam Shiva. Oh, Nam Shiva. My younger brother watched that like every day after school. So like, I really know that movie well.
Sure. That's the reason. Okay. There's so much there. I want to start with recommending to people, if you want to A, horrify yourself, and B, learn more about the history in humanity of human sacrifice and cannibalism, go check out Daryl Cooper's Martyr Made podcast for I think it's 3-episode series called Human Sacrifice and Cannibalism.
Is he for or against? Because I've heard a lot about that guy. Is he apologizing for it? Is he a neo-cannibal?
You want me to just jump to the end? You want to know if the Death Star gets blown up or not, Bob? Well, what he does is explain it, and I was surprised that Bret didn't have any kind of an evolutionary guess as to why this behavior has appeared in various places and various times. And if you listen to Martyr Made, he's got a few ideas, and I think they're probably right.
Just to stop you, so I'm glad you had the same thing. That's one thing I wanted to ask you, if you took the same thing. So, folks, obviously we're playing just clips here. You may have thought, in the interest of brevity, we clipped out Bret when he went on for a 13-minute spiel about, and what the evolutionary biologist said. And no, he didn't. I don't know if he just forgot, like he has a theory and just forgot, but he did not come back to and never. Yeah.
He said, we do not have an explanation or something, words to that effect. So maybe it's just something he's never studied because it's disgusting. Hard to blame him. But there are things about tribes of human beings in dire situations where you can imagine them resorting to cannibalism and human sacrifice to help group cohesion. Scapegoats is one of them. I think that's kind of what the Salem witch trials was about a little bit. There's things about the perceived strength of your
convicted.
Enemy in a jury of their peers.
Yeah.
But
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but did you see on Twitter when people were going off on the Trump, deporting people and sending them to El Salvador, and someone referred to it as a Salem witch trial, and they said, "See, so having a trial doesn't necessarily guarantee."
Arguments are fun; they're fun to make. But anyway, you can imagine people who don't have, they haven't gone through the Enlightenment, they haven't found Christianity or anything. You can see why these people would come up with very horrific acts in order to satisfy group cohesion. And group cohesion, of course, has an evolutionary positive impact. If you can keep the tribe together and unified in one purpose, believing the same thing, maybe a human sacrifice gets you there. Maybe eating the flesh of your enemy will get you there and give you the fortitude spiritually to do what it takes to make sure that you survive and they don't. I don't think it's that hard to postulate a reason why these things might have evolved as disgusting as they are, because group cohesion is one of the biggest reasons we got here, right?
Yeah, and this all so the obvious thinker on this is Rene Girard, and so in our circles, David Gornowski has been. Do you know who he is?
Yeah, I had him on.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, I had him on my show a few times too. But yeah, he's the one that's popularized Girard's work, and right in layman's terms, yes, like scapegoat theory, and why is that a thing? And it's interesting. Because it seems pretty straightforward, sort of the cliche in the Arthur Miller, the Crucible kind of stuff about something bad's going on, and blame the minority. This is the popular thing about why the Jews were persecuted and whatever. You got some minority group that their ways are different from ours. Something's happening, and people are getting sick or whatever. Oh, they're doing something nefarious. It kind of focuses the community and gives you something to do to get together. But then what's interesting is in Girard's work, though, it's not just that. He said that what typically happens though is then later, like, so you grab the person and kill them, let's say, in some sort of public ritual. But then after you kind of backfill the story and then give that person some kind of supernatural status.
Yes.
I guess, I haven't read Girard in the original. I'm just going off of what Gornowski's summary was. And, I read some other secondary stuff. But I think the idea was, it was partly to kind of us, to explain what we did, because it's kind of like after, like, oh yeah, we kind of just hang that guy from a tree when, he clearly could not have been responsible for all those kids getting cancer. How could that even work? But
can I paint that
yeah.
in a little bit more?
Go
Because I
ahead.
think we
Go
might
ahead.
have to do it here in a couple of years again. I think it was, if you listen to Daryl Cooper's podcast, he formulates this theory.
Mm-hmm.
It's like something happened in the group, if it's the scapegoat theory, that made them do just something terrible. You know, they got some wild hair up their butt and they did something horrible, or maybe they were fighting for no good reason and it was just getting really, really bad. And so they came up with a scapegoat that was the reason for it. Must have been some witch. You kill that person, and then through that act, the group achieves a catharsis, and they can say,
Mm-hmm.
"Well, that's over. That put an end to it." And then you retcon your history to make it all make sense. Which is basically what you were saying. But I think it relates to now because what we just went through with COVID and all this identitarian politics and racism and sexism and this trans lunacy. I wouldn't be surprised if we need some huge moment of catharsis again to make it make sense why we just did what we did. Maybe they'll use Trump. Who knows? But I wouldn't. It makes sense that we are a culture in need of a scapegoat right now. Oh, maybe make it Fauci. He's pretty old.
Yeah. Yeah. So, a couple more things. So clearly, just to address it with the religious aspect. So one way of viewing that, I mean, obviously, the Mosaic Law had ritual sacrifice of animals, and also God, gives Abraham his son, and then famously tells him, "Okay, now you're going to go up on the mountain and sacrifice him," and then at the last second stays his hand. A lot of people don't like that story. I get it, but the point is, God is asking, to show. I mean, God knows in the story. If you things are all fairy tales, fair enough. But in the logic of the story, God knew that Abraham was going to obey him. So the point was not for God. It wasn't a test for God to see, let me see what would happen here. Like he would have known either way. But I think it was also for Isaac's sake that he realizes, whoa, my dad seriously believes in this stuff. Like he's not screwing around. And then also, but the important point is, God stays his hand and then shows, okay, yes, so that's good. Yes, you should have been willing to give up your first, your son, not firstborn, give up your son for me. I don't ask you to do that, but you know what? I'm going to give up my son for all of you. Like that's, Christian. And then of course the big point is Jesus comes, he is the scapegoat. But that's what ends it. Like he's the sacrifice to end all sacrifices, right? So that's in the logic of, so there is something about humanity's fallen nature that they need to go kill some innocent thing to expunge their guilt. And the point was that wasn't working until Jesus came, and then boom, it's finished, right? So that's kind of the idea there. I have another thing to say too, Ed, but do you want to respond to any of that, since I kind of just summarized two of the major religions of world history?
So eloquently.
Yeah.
No, I think you're basically right, and I'm not a religious scholar in the slightest, but I think there's something about the Christ sacrifice story that makes it more universal than something you'd find in a more primitive tribe from an earlier age. It's making the thing, you don't have to keep doing it over and over. We don't have to keep throwing people into the volcano. This happened once, and it's universal for all man. Definitely see why that would be an upgrade.
Yep. Okay, I got to read this. All right, so this is a real academic paper. This was published in the Review of Behavioral Economics 2014. The title is Human Sacrifice. The abstract. This paper develops a theory of rational human sacrifice, the purchase and ritual slaughter of innocent persons to appease divinities. I argue that human sacrifice is a technology for protecting property rights. It improves property protection by destroying part of sacrificing communities' wealth, which suppresses the expected payoff of plundering them. Human sacrifice is a highly effective vehicle for destroying wealth to protect property rights because it is an excellent public meter of wealth destruction. Human sacrifice is spectacular, publicly communicating a sacrificer's destruction far and wide. Further, immolating a live person is nearly impossible to fake, verifying the amount of wealth a sacrificer has destroyed. To incentivize community members to contribute wealth for destruction, human sacrifice is presented as a religious obligation. To test my theory, I investigate human sacrifice as practiced by the most significant and well-known society of ritual immolators in the modern era, the Khans of Orissa, India. Evidence from the Khans supports my theory's predictions. Okay, so that was what I thought was the best candidate for a satirical article that was actually written in earnest. That was from Pete Leeson of George Mason, and I don't often bring that up because there's a bit of a rivalry between like the Auburn Austrians and the GMU ones, and I'm afraid it would just look like I was, going ha. But when I saw that page, I was like, "Are you kidding me?"
I hope.
So, anyway, to all evidence suggests that I've encountered suggests he is dead serious about that, and there you go. So, anyway.
Really, wow.
But the thing is, I'll go ahead and play devil's advocate. Why are you surprised? You were just saying that there's theory. You know what I mean? It's just you disagree with his particular theory, perhaps. But anyway, Tucker wants to just say that's kind of nutty, and Bret and you want to say no. See, we can come up with, and Gerard can say no. There's reasons, and he's just giving a more economistic.
I guess I'll withhold judgment until I read the entire article.
Yeah, I will confess when I went and because when we were getting ready to what we're going to do, and I said, "Oh wait, I gotta go grab Leeson's article." It didn't strike me as insane tonight when I reread the abstract as when I first encountered it. So I don't know if it's just because the novelty is worn off, but anyway, when I first read that, I thought this has got to be a joke. Like it's a really published paper. Yeah.
1 point for novelty is you just read it to me for the first time, and I thought immediately it had to be a joke. A couple quick things.
Like if I could just stop, like if James Lindsay of the left, or do I repeat myself, were to do a hoax to discredit,
right.
George Mason economics,
right.
It would be that paper. Like what else could you possibly do?
For sure. No doubt. I thought it was interesting that Tucker said we need supernatural and the concept of evil to explain human sacrifice because people do it even when there's no resource constraints. And if you listen to the Martyr Made podcast on the subject, it doesn't have anything to do with resource constraints. They're not killing people because they can't feed their babies. It's not an Irish potato famine sort of thing. Mm-hmm. It's, again, group cohesion in the face of a weird psychological schism that I think is the reason that it came up.
So can I just ask you to understand Tucker's deal? So tell me if you think this is basically where he was coming from, to say something like, there's nothing rational about that, right? Like if it's people keep dying from the cold. Well, we got to figure out a better way to build houses. It's not that you just start going around randomly killing people to alleviate our concern about too many people are dying from the elements. That doesn't make any sense. Why would that biologically be selected for? Like sure. You wouldn't see deer going around killing some of them because they can't find, well, I guess the food thing, population, but you're right. He's explicitly ruling that out, that it's not just a matter of we're killing off some of the weakest members so the rest can survive with the limited resources. So there's that element that it seems irrational. Like,
sure,
if these people really are innocent, then what good does it do to kill them? But then also he's appealing to, there's something like satanic or, going on there. Like, it's not just a weird practice. Like the people think they're channeling something spooky. And so that's what he's saying. And I think that they are. Like, there really are dark forces, and that's really the best explanation of this. And you just to explain it by, well, no, gene selection and the blah, 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 there's a mutation and propagates, and that's why these populations engage in sacrifice. Like, that doesn't make any sense to him. Do you agree that's what he was saying?
For sure. I mean, and the story totally makes sense. I'd argue that the quote unquote evil comes from deep in the recesses of the human psyche and not something defined as supernatural. But the difference between us and deer, there are many. They have lovely cloven hooves and can run fast, but they're also not a psychological species in the way we are, where we have really weird and deep psychological needs, especially when gathered together in groups, and it leads us to go insane from time to time. And I think this human sacrifice and cannibalism thing is one weird way that we keep coming up with to try and protect us from something worse. Hard to imagine what could be worse, but like extinction would be. Mm-hmm. And if you can't figure out a way to find a scapegoat and cohere the group into one organism that can cooperate, then you might lose to the tribe over the next hill.
Can I ask you, I'm just curious your take. So from a Christian perspective, I now like the idea that, there's some malevolent force that misleads humans. And that's really the only way to understand history, because you might have thought over time we just keep getting better and better. Like, you identify errors and you get better, that all these other things do. You would think war should keep dialing down. And I get how, the countervailing thing is technology gets better. And so, but then I also realize there are people making the argument that, yes, things in general are better, like the rates of just petty crime and blah, blah, blah. And, humans are less violent on a day-to-day per capita basis now than in the year 1500, let's say. I think that's like the Guns, Germs, and Steel guy makes that case somewhere.
Yeah.
And but now it's more publicity. World War II was bad, but again, that's because of the technology and other forms of social control. It's not that the human impulse to harm others. Actually, it is way better now than it was in the year 1500. Like, where do you fall on that question?
Repeat the question again. The quick
version. Do you
version?
think there's a sense in which humanity does keep getting better over time, and we just notice certain aberrations that can be explained as technology or whatever?
I think we get greater visibility on our nature. I don't know if that translates into better over time.
But also I'm saying, like, if there weren't a devil manipulating us and seducing us to the dark side, you might have just thought people should get more moral in general over time.
Oh, no, I don't think we necessarily will get more moral over time. And a religious person would explain that by the fact that there is a supernatural evil always seducing us.
Yeah.
And I would explain it more the way the ancient Greeks would have. Like, I think it made sense for them to...
Blame it on Pan?
Kind of. I think it made sense for them to make, war a deity, and to write stories in which people get possessed by that deity and get possessed by other deities when they, or enchanted by them or inspired by them when they do courageous things. Or I think we have an ability for our inner psyche to make us do things that are horrific to our cohesive rational self. And I don't think that's ever going to go away. I think as we get more scientific understanding, we can see what's going on and maybe come up with institutions and mechanisms and education by which we could bob and weave. And it's part of why raising children correctly is so important. You've got to integrate your personality such that you're not a psychopath. And if you don't do that, then you're going to be a demon walking on the earth. That's how you're going to be perceived by anyone religious, and I'm fine with that phrasing. So getting more technological advancement doesn't save you from that. Our psychological demons are always going to be with us.
Okay, you have the clip in here too where he's talking about the baseball game and being Adams.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I'll wait, because what I'm curious then is when you're saying, it's like the ancient Greeks said, and I made the joke, and then you're like, yeah, like. So that's a supernatural explanation. Like you said, no, it's not. What Tucker says, it's no. There's a bunch of gods, and they're
No, what I'm saying is, I don't think that's literally true. I'm just saying that's a useful narrative for understanding what's going on. If you didn't know what psychology was, if you didn't have any idea about what was going on,
right?
In the brain.
So I'm sorry, we can move on from this. I'm not trying to do a gotcha. I'm genuinely asking you. Do you think prima facie it is a bit awkward for a naturalist worldview that you would think humanity should just keep, over the course of 50-year stretches, kind of get more and more moral, and then, eventually we're going to colonizing space and whatever, and we're like the Federation of Planets, and the humans in Star Trek are pretty good.
No, I'm optimistic about humanity's future, and I do think we will get better and better and better. It's just not that these things just won't ever absolutely go away. In my perspective, we evolved from these weird ape-like creatures that were hugely destructive, and that we still have that in us.
Do the apes immolate themselves, or
they didn't develop fire?
So they can't.
So they can't.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next clip, where he talks about Bret Weinstein talks about the usefulness of religion. Basically, I love this clip a lot. So, without further ado,
get more focused on just like the reality of it. Like if there is no supernatural, then like what is all this stuff?
Well,
like what's the other explanation?
So I will tell you how I deal with the question personally.
Yes.
Which is I have a category that I don't share with anybody as far as I know that I would call the metanatural, right? Which is sort of the advantage that comes from believing in the supernatural. I believe it all ultimately could be explained through a natural system in the same way you could explain a baseball game by thinking of all of the atoms in the baseball and the bat and the players. But that's a terrible way to think about baseball, right? It just doesn't, it's not functional. But yes, you could in principle do it. So I think that the belief in the supernatural is a much more efficient way of encoding hidden truths that you can't readily comprehend. So to give you one example, you might have a system in which you imagine that the misbehavior of your people, whoever they might be, is going to result in the anger of a God who will punish you with famine.
Right.
Okay. That would be supernatural. It's also true that if your people are busy betraying each other, that may threaten the harvest. In other words, your coordination in the planting of crops, the protecting of those crops, and the harvesting of those crops is dependent on whether or not people like and trust each other. And to the extent that they're backstabbing each other, it could very well result in starvation without the intervention of an intentional God. So to me, those two stories are the same story. How do you explain to people you really shouldn't misbehave because it could interfere with our coordination in a way that may result in us not having enough food to get through the winter? The answer is, God sees what you're doing and he's not happy about it. And when God's not happy, starvation is highly likely, right? So the metanatural is the category that allows the reconciliation of the efficient narrative description of this process with the difficult to spot deeper physical connection.
I think that's,
sorry, Tucker, didn't mean to cut you off like that. Yeah, this is a concept I talk about all the time when I think about such things or speak about them with my friends. I don't know the word metanatural. I don't really like it, but I didn't have a word. But I think it's great to have a system by which you can transmit complex ideas, or at least the way to behave, from wise people to the laity, embedded in narratives that are easy to understand and easy to say, easy to uptake, so that a person doesn't have to study game theory or even have invented it or understand the deep moral, they don't have to have read Human Action to figure out why we need to cooperate and why it's bad to lie and why harmony is better than, the quick fix of bopping a guy over the head and stealing his apple. You're never going to get more apples. You get more apples the organized way, the harmonious way. So I didn't have a name for that, but that's why I wish more people would go to church rather than less, even though I'm an atheist. I like people going to a room where every Sunday where a wise person will read from a book that has a lot of good wisdom in it and impart that to them, so that they don't have to study these things themselves. They can go out and just live their lives and have a nice, healthy nest of narratives that help them understand right from wrong. I love that.
Yeah, that was also my favorite part of the clip. Let me ask, is that right in the same place where he talked about the baseball game? Or is that, do you remember what I'm talking about?
We just heard about the baseball game.
Did he say it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I was going off. Okay.
Where were you, Bob?
I was communing with Athena. Okay.
A demon was whispering in your ear.
No, Athena.
Okay.
Not the demon. Minerva. So, so anyway, wow, that's funny. Okay, good. So that's Yeah, I love that and everything about it. What's interesting though, a few points here is he said, right, to paraphrase, we can explain the benefit of us of being honorable or whatever, and not betraying each other in terms of the underlying things about productivity and whatever. Or you could just say, the God is mad at us and whatever. And so of those two explanations, that they both kind of work. Which one's simpler? God's mad at us, right? So according to his own criterion, that's the correct explanation. The other one's wrong, right? So again, I'm just trying to show his original framing is a little bit off, right?
You make a good point, but of course he would respond with something like, well, yeah, but then just pull back. And then we have to explain God, and that gets even more complicated to the point where a thing we can't possibly understand.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. Whereas my point was that they're both correct. It's not that the more complicated one is wrong. It's that it works in a different plane.
He says it beautifully. He says these are the same story.
Exactly. And this is what I'm going to say with the baseball game. It's when you say you could explain it with, molecules and blah, blah, blah. Right, but it's still correct to say it's a baseball game and the batter is up and number 8, struck out. Those are true statements. And so likewise, where I think what he was trying to do there was to say, well, see, yeah, Tucker, I get the way I explained the utility of religion. Like, clearly, though, Bret thinks, I don't think there actually is a God. And I want to say, but that, in his analogy, that would be like saying, it's not like there really are baseball players. It really is just molecules, but it's a very convenient shorthand to say it's as if there's another baseball team who's up and they're trying to win the game and there's only, 2 outs left and blah, blah. You get what I'm saying? Like it's not as if, or this is a good theory. It's like, no, it's correct. There is a baseball game going on here.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. And it goes to underscore that this isn't a unification of minds. It's a meeting of minds.
Yes.
And that's fine.
Yeah. So, because I love it. There's 2 quick things of again, I didn't know, I didn't have a term for it myself, but my thing with like prayer, does prayer work? And there's a weird sense in which well, God knows what you're going to pray for. So why would, God's going to change the universe? Oh, wait a minute. Jimmy here asked for, his leg to get fixed in time for the big soccer game. So I'm going to change the laws of fit. That is kind of goofy. Why do people say prayers? But on the other hand, I do think it makes sense. And also I think God designed the universe such that, if a bunch of people really are thinking about you or whatever, that does ripple and it actually does change the course of history.
Sure.
And so, and also too, that's also why bad things I think it really screwed up the American public when those photos from Gitmo and stuff were coming out and when they saw what U.S. soldiers were doing.
Abu Ghraib, yeah.
Yeah, and it just, I think that messed with people and the bailouts and stuff. I think that just sent a message and screwed things up. And then another example, I think if modern atheist scientists or skeptical scientists took a time machine back, they would have seen Moses going to Pharaoh and saying, or God says, let my people go. And that there were plagues, but they would have looked, and I forget the exact order, but it'd be like, oh no, there was some chemical change and it made the river turn blood red. But really we can explain. And then because that changed, all the frogs started jumping out because they're like, what the heck is this? And then they brought a bunch of flies with them. And then the flies killed all the cattle and blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? They could explain it all the way, but yet, no, Moses was saying God's going to bring down these plagues on you. Anyway,
in other words,
they're both correct. Yeah.
In other words, it is a baseball game.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. It's not just wow, what are the chances? But no, it's not that there really was this God thing giving Moses the words to say. It was just blah, blah, anyway, you get the point. Yes, you anticipate. I'm saying it's not enough to explain away the baseball game by saying ultimately in principle it's molecules and blah, blah, blah. It's a shorthand. No, there really is. So anyway, I love what Bret did there, and I think that's great. And I guess last thing I'll say, I understand too that is it Christopher Hitchens' point, or no, it's Ricky Gervais says it too, that clearly Bret thinks I can explain all kinds of stuff, even all the religions that you Christians think are all bogus, and I just apply that elimination technique to all of them, the N+1 in yours as well. So you end up thinking one religion's right, I end up thinking 0 is right. I get that.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. This next clip. Bret and Tucker edge up against the is-ought distinction in a really cool way. So
something we've also discussed. We're just
yes,
basically
I'm telling you, they're
catching
following
up to
us. They're
Yes.
following us.
My question is deeper. Why do we all assume that life is better than death? That kindness is better than cruelty? That it's better to pass on your genes than to go extinct? I mean, these are all moral judgments that seem impossible in the absence of a God.
Well, I don't think they're impossible. I just think they're incredibly cumbersome.
Well, they're arbitrary.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you can say, well, I prefer one, but you can't say one is like absolutely better than the other. Says who?
I think there's only one of them that's arbitrary. I mean, we're way off in the weeds and all of your...
No, I think this is like central.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad you do. I don't think there is a robust analytical argument for why being alive is superior to not being alive. I think this is, and mind you, I am very committed to the idea that being alive is way better.
Yes.
And I'm intending to stay alive as long as possible and to help those I love do the same. So it's not that I'm confused about this, but analytically speaking, what is it about life that's superior to not life? Well, the answer is nothing, except you would expect a lot of creatures that are the product of a competition between those who were committed to living and those that weren't so committed to it. You would expect an accumulation of bias where we would all inherit the same analytical perspective, even though it's not grounded in the physical reality of the universe. So that one, the only point there is, I think that one is actually arbitrary. But once you agree that being alive is pretty great and beats the alternative, and you're going to get an infinite amount of the alternative anyway, so you might as well preserve the one space of being alive that you're going to get, right? Once you're there, well, then the answer is the rest of it follows, right? Why should you be honorable? Well, because actually it preserves your spot in the universe much better than...
I get it. But then you're back to the practical analysis of it.
Well,
right.
I mean, this is...
But we can't elide past what you described as arbitrary because it's the root of everything.
Well, I agree. It is.
Yeah.
And I love this confusion, right? I think that being confused into thinking life is great, I mean, what else is there, right?
So good. So the fascinating thing there, well, there's a couple of fascinating things. They think it's arbitrary whether life is better than death. Tucker says, Tucker is like a lot of religious people. Maybe you'll push back against this, but I think part of why he wants to believe in God is because he craves some kind of certainty. He's like, yeah, I mean, we have an intuition that murder is worse than not murder, but like, says who? Mm-hmm. It's ultimately arbitrary. He wants something divine to say what's good and what's evil. And, I think our species doesn't have access to that. We have to figure it out we have to figure these sorts of things out for ourselves. But what's weird is even Bret Weinstein says, yeah, it's totally arbitrary. But once you decide that you prefer life over death, then all these other things spin out from it. And I think that part's true. And I wonder, I got a theory I want to run past you, Bob. I think they could have used an economist here, because there is something about the concept of demonstrated preference that says that all life, every time it's presented with a choice to chooses life, 99.99999% of the time. And yes, there are exceptions, suicide in the case of pain and despair and other reasons. But isn't the vast accumulation of demonstrated preference proof that life is better than death? And when someone like Tucker says who? Well, the answer is says every living thing, for the vast majority of all living things across all time. That's who says who.
Yeah, a lot in the clip and what you just said. The way I thought, what I was going to invoke the need for an economist was what Bret said was very close to Mises' views on this stuff. That Mises, he's I think he might have used the term utilitarian, but he didn't mean it in a crude. I think like consequentialist would be more of an apt description of his view on morality. That it was very instrumental, and there was no such thing as like natural law. And he would even say like, nature, the law is the lion eats the zebra or whatever. It's there you go. But right, that the higher productivity of the division of labor, and that you need to maintain social bonds, and so everything follows from that. But ultimately, he said, if you preferred destruction to prosperity, and you didn't want to reduce childhood mortality and stuff like that, then I couldn't prove to you that you shouldn't be a socialist. But given that you have these these goals, blah blah blah, it all follows. So that it was very similar to that. Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I also agree with you with Tucker. He likes to have very certain, when they were saying, I'm against human sacrifice, he goes, so is God. And I mean, and I could just even see, like, if I were debating like tariffs or something with him, he'd be like, the manufacturing base, it went away. Yeah, NAFTA was terrible. He would just say stuff with certainty. You'd be like, I can't argue
It's
with
interesting. In the previous clip, not this one, he says that he totally gets how human nature, responds to our evolution, evolutionary pressure. He says he gets that, but he needs to invoke a God that started it all. I think that's, again, he craves certainty, and you don't get that, you're not going to get that without something as transcendental and divine as an almighty creator, an eternal creator.
Also, I think Bret, so again, I think he was just being fair there, but I was warning it too, and he said it, that yes, there is a sense in which you can't analytically prove that you should prefer to maintain your life than to let it expire, but that there's a reason, like, you have these proclivities, that's something a Darwinian I could easily give a pass to explain. Well, why should we want to stay alive? And like, duh, you know what I mean? Like, that's not hard to explain. And so anyway,
actually, he does.
Why should the lion go looking for food? Like, well, duh, like that's not a mystery.
He does have an analytic reason, or at least a narrative for it. He says when he teaches evolution that the purpose of our genes is to throw them copies of themselves as far into the future as possible.
Yeah.
And well, what is that?
To be clear, he said it real fast in the clip you just played. That he said something like, "We have this bias because," you know what I mean. But he almost acted like that would be cheating or so. So again, I get it. He was trying to be super fair and saying, if you give me that, then everything else does follow. There is a logical reason for it. Like, you can't rob banks. Well, why not? Well, because But then if somebody challenged and said, well, I get that I have these urges and I fear death, and if I'm in a tank filling up with water, I'm going to panic and do everything I can to get out, and that's biologically programmed into me.
For sure.
But strictly speaking, why couldn't I just go jump off a bridge intentionally? Like, why not? If I don't feel like, well, you can't prove to me that, no, I should. I think that's what he was trying to get at.
I want to unfairly...
Can I just say, though, that there's something, though. You're right. You couldn't prove this in any sense, but I mean, if we looked out and we found that there were even just bacteria on Neptune, people would flip out. Like, scientists would be dancing in the street. That'd be so awesome. What a discovery. You got what I mean? Like, so there is a sense in which, and also too, from a materialist perspective, there's not something intrinsically different in the molecules that make up living cells than the things that make up, a slab of granite.
You sound like Dr. Manhattan in The Watchmen. He gives that exact, he's trying to poo-poo life on Earth. Well, strictly speaking, there's nothing.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm trying to explain the meta. I would have to go review that. I certainly would not have killed the guy, the Rorschach.
Rorschach at the end.
Yes. And also his treatment of the Vietnamese. I don't think
he didn't like that at all.
No. But anyway, But yeah, it's the combination, the way they're arranged, the pattern, whatever language you want to use, the emergent phenomenon is astonishing. And you get into biology textbooks about, like, what's the definition of life, and I forget, like, viruses are like kind of on the borderline. Is it alive or not? And it makes copies, but blah blah blah. But it hijacks. So anyway, I'm just saying there is a sense in which a living thing, a clump of matter that is alive is amazing and miraculous in a sense. And then there is a sense in which, when it dies and it's inert and it's just, decomposing, that it's a lot that's not generating new interesting things. And then certainly at the level of humans, you can do a whole lot with a group of alive humans than you can with their corpses, right?
Play a baseball game.
With the you'd be more like a soccer game. Oh, you mean with the alive ones? Yes, gotcha.
We're doing great, and I think we're actually going to get through all these clips. Before we move on, though, I want to unfairly psychoanalyze Tucker Carlson in his absence and without a degree. He really, I think most of what he thinks is that craving for a bedrock foundation upon which to construct the things he believes. And one of the things holding him, like, he doesn't like the fact that our senses are faulty. I've heard him, not in this podcast, but in other ones. Our ability to reason is limited. You know, we're subject to error, and he hates that. He wants a bedrock set of truths upon which to act. And I think it's just important to understand, at least I think, our species needs to act in the face of uncertain information. That's how we were made. That's the environment we find ourselves in. And I think we do better when we understand that.
It is interesting. I love how that's kind of your main thing.
Yeah.
And you're a poker player. I just love it.
Yeah. Yep. It's like I was drawn to it, right? Chess is boring. All right. Well, it's about time we solve the problem in the Middle East.
Let's do it.
All right. We've got 3 short clips strung together here, folks, and I apologize, but there was a huge concept and it ranged over like 20 minutes. I don't want to play a 20-minute long clip, so I stripped out all the things in between. And please bear with us. This one's really good.
We're getting ready for 3 in a row.
Three clips in a row, back to back to back. Here we go.
I believe the story that is playing out in the Middle East is one of what I call lineage. Here's where things get possibly a bit technical. In my field, we do not typically talk about lineages in the context of, let's say, humans. Typically, there are 2 camps in biology. There are the kin selectionists who believe in the importance of shared genes in terms of predisposing people to collaborate. And then there are the group selectionists who believe that altruism provides such a powerful advantage to people who put those things aside that actually it should dominate our discussion. And these 2 groups both view each other as foolish. I think they're both wrong for different reasons. And that the correct way to understand humans and their evolution involves 2 important realizations. One, that the kin selectionists are right about the importance of genes in predisposing people to cooperate with each other. But they do not understand that you can extrapolate well beyond named kin, right? Kin selection doesn't stop just because you lose track of your 5th cousin. That a population of people that can detect that they are closely related has reason to collaborate, genetic reason, even if they can't specify their degree of relatedness to each other. And that this has a lot to do with the way history has unfolded. That up until very recently, most history at the scale that we study it is a process of lineage against lineage, violence and displacement. That populations displace each other from the earth because that's the way to accomplish the evolutionary goal. It's the same sort of drive as causes the sapling to reach for the sun.
Right.
Now, in human beings, we have a choice. That's not the only basis, that's not the only mechanism of competition that we can use. And in fact, the West, the modern West, is built on a different basis for collaboration. It's based on reciprocity. And the idea is, in the West, we agree to put our lineage level origins aside and to collaborate with other people because they have something valuable to bring to the table. We are caught in a tension between these 2 modes of collaboration. You've got the ancient mode, which involves lineage against lineage violence, in which, you know, you can find this in the Old Testament. You can find it in the Quran, right? It's written in there, the rules of war and combat and how you are to view the enemy, their outgroup, and you are to view them that way. And, you know, effectively, they are treated as other. Or you can have a collaborative modality, and you see these two threads competing, in my opinion, inside the state of Israel.
So really you're saying it's Old Testament versus New Testament.
I am.
Because the New Testament is universalist. And Jesus says this again and again, I'm here for everybody. It doesn't matter what your bloodline is. I'm here for everybody. And I'm also opposed to violence. And I'm going to show you that I'm opposed to violence, because when one of the disciples tries to use a sword against the guy who's arresting him to torture him to death, Jesus scolds the disciple for using violence, even then. So like those are one is Western, one is Eastern. Or whatever, whatever you want to describe those two hemispheres as being, but they're those the two hemispheres, and it's like it's in the same book.
Right. Now, notice what just happened. I just described this to you in what I understand to be rigorous game theoretic biological terms, dry, dull, and boring, and you came back with the obvious rejoinder that actually, no, we have a narrative. We've actually got a name and a location and a description of this upgrade. And being told that there are only two sides, you're either with Israel or against it. And with Israel means on board for what's going on in Gaza. And with Israel means ready to attack Iran, right? By being forced into that category, we are missing the possibility that actually what should be happening right now is that America isn't always good at being part of the West. The West is an ideal. Sometimes we live up to it. Yeah. Sometimes we don't. But the right thing to happen at the moment, I believe, is for the West to try to bail the Middle East out of this us or them dynamic, to lead the way into this stable coexistence and ability to collaborate that's better for all of us. Not only is the upside very positive, but it avoids the massive downside of war in the Middle East, dragging the entire world back into the Old Testament and the Quran and lineage against lineage violence, which I really think ought to be our top priority.
I agree completely.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Bob Murphy. We just heard Bret Weinstein, a famous evolutionary biologist, say that what is required is for Western civilization to help the Middle East and basically pull our planet away from the Old Testament and towards the new. In fact, he calls it an upgrade. And this is a scientist speaking to you. And the bizarre thing is, I'm convinced. Help me, Bob. What just happened?
Well, yeah, it was interesting. So I had told you, make sure we include the clip, because I don't want to say basically what he said was, and people think I'm grasping that. Yeah, when I watched it, I was kind of stunned that he explicitly. So I guess it was Tucker chimed in and then threw in the New Testament part. But clearly, yes, what Bret was saying is that the, Judaism and Islam are wrong and Christianity is an improvement.
And I don't think he's going out on a limb to suggest that Western civilization has, a few core pillars, and one of them is Christianity.
Yeah. So this is funny because that was part of my upbringing. Was the guy's, is it M. Stanton Evans? Let me just use let me see. I don't want to say I think the book's name is The Theme is Freedom. What's this guy's name? Yes, M. Stanton Evans. Wow, that was like when I know my phone number from when I was 13. Like it was one of those deals. So yeah, this is when I was an atheist, but I was into, Austrian economics and stuff. So this is like high school. And one of the books I got was The Theme is Freedom by M. Stanton Evans. And he was arguing that, to explain the rise of Europe and how is it that, the Europeans went around and subjugated the world and not vice versa. And he rooted it in Christianity, and that, the respect for the individual that flows out of the New Testament. And that's the basis for what we now think of as individual rights and all that, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, there was the Inquisition. Okay, so I remember when I read that, I just thought that was preposterous. And at the time, I thought, oh, this is such whitewashing. No, it was rationalism. It was, the Renaissance and Enlightenment and this kind of thing. And are you kidding me? The Inquisition's going around torturing people and heretics and what else? So I totally didn't believe that at the time. And then now, as you can imagine, I am more sympathetic to that perspective, Adam. Yeah. So what's funny too is a lot of the, like the classical liberal types, like the intellectual dark web people or whatever, from when they first were up and running and they wanted free speech and hey, we should be able to say what we want. And like, it is funny how they had such natural allies with like American evangelicals, even though many of them were explicitly atheists. And even like Jordan Peterson defending theism wasn't, really a devout theist. He was kind of like playing with it intellectually. So anyway, I do think there is that affinity, and yeah, it was just repeating myself at this point. I was surprised at how openly Bret just tiptoed up to, what needs to happen. We sound like Ann Coulter. We should invade their countries, replace their leaders, and Christianize everybody. He didn't say the invasion.
He didn't quite say that part.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of cool stuff in there. For one thing, describing the behavior here in lineage terms, evolutionary lineage terms, it explains another bizarre behavior, which is the suicide bomber, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how in the world can that help propel your genes forward into the future when you're just going to go and blow yourself up along with a bunch of the out group? And it makes sense if you think that the piece of my genes that are in my kin, they're more likely to survive if I go to this horrible thing into the future. And
yeah, can we just pause on that to make sure people, like with the kin selection and all that? So the idea is, like, how could it ever make sense from an evolutionary perspective that, the proverbially the guy jumps on the grenade kind of thing? And in general,
right.
Like, do we see that? And so the idea is right. And this flows, I mean, it wasn't his thing, but Dawkins, the selfish gene, kind of, crystallized this approach and say, really, it's not that the organism wants to survive. It's that, or even that the organism wants to reproduce itself. It's strictly speaking, look at it from the perspective of your genes making copies of themselves. And then that's really that, looking at through that analytical lens unlocks a lot of these mysteries. And then that, so yes, if there is a gene that predisposes, like, a gene that makes you just want to go jump off a cliff. And that's also why the lemmings is Walt Disney made that up. That doesn't make any sense. Why would they do that? That's stupid. Right. A gene that just makes you want to go kill yourself per se, why would that gene persist? But a gene that makes you willing to lay down your life for 4 of your kids that are 13 years old or older, that totally makes sense, right? Because then your kids, there's a 50% chance each of them has that gene. So by doing that, if you allow them to live, then that gene now knows, oh, I probably made 3 copies of myself. And so that totally makes sense. That's a good deal, right? So anyway, stuff like that's where you can play with it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting instance of the well-worn phrase, acting for the benefit of something bigger than yourself. Mm-hmm. Jumping on that grenade, that's much better vision than blowing people up in a cafe with a suicide vest. But, in a sense, a person doing that is acting in the interests of something bigger than themselves, their genes distributed amongst their 150 closest kin. And then Bret's point is that Western civilization comes along based on a bunch of things, but, he mentions reciprocity. And then all of a sudden, if that works, lineage becomes less important. The in-group expands, violence decreases, cooperation expands, we get wealthier. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, but what do you think? I mean, do you think he's trying to push too much into too small a vessel, just calling this an upgrade from Old Testament to New? How do you like his framing? That's one sentence that explains a whole lot. Do you think it fits?
Well, I mean, I think for sure, I'm a pacifist. I think violence is overrated and that it's seductive, the way the dark side of the force is, and that you think it's going to solve a bunch of problems and it doesn't. Yeah. And a lot of this too, flowing out of the Misesian worldview, that there really isn't a conflict, that whatever your goals are in general, unless you really have this deep-seated hatred and you just loathe the very idea of this people over there existing. But in general, the fact that there's people over there, that's not a threat to you. That doesn't, in general, their existence is going to allow them and you together collectively to exploit natural resources and specialize and trade such that you all have a higher standard of living than if you wiped them out. And this, I maybe we got into this in previous ones. I can't remember, Adam, but like it was an upgrade to when you conquered somebody to just enslave them and just say, oh, we're not going to wipe you out. We're going to leave you alive to till your fields, and we're just going to periodically get tribute from you instead of wiping you out, because then we would have to go till your fields and blah, blah, blah. That's a pain. We don't have enough labor. And so, and also too, like the Old Testament, my understanding is that was, and this would fit since I think that it was God doing that too, that the Mosaic Code actually was an improvement. And for example, an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth was a limiting principle.
It's a limiting principle.
Yeah. The point wasn't go around and get vengeance on people. The point was, right now, you bloodthirsty savage, if someone takes your eye out, you want to go kill him and his whole family. No, you can't do that. That's not proportional, right? So anyway, and then of course, I would say Jesus then, like, there's a reason he came to the Jews, right? Sorry for some of the people on social media that don't like that. So anyway, and there was something too about, I don't think we didn't have in these clips, right? But Bret got into like the father son.
I was just
narrative.
About to mention,
and it was amazing. Yeah,
he phrased it as a difference in the framework of the perspective between the father and the son.
Yeah,
and he says we need to follow through with the installation of that upgrade.
And by the way, and he wasn't, if I recall correctly, he meant that more generically, like to say just in general, like the current generation passing on to the next, and how. Yeah, like obviously the current generation has to raise the, helpless infants are going to die if the adults don't take care of them and stuff. But yet there also is a sense in which at some point the kids have to take over and we're going to do different things from what we were taught. But even though that legacy is important, and then when he's connecting this, I appreciated more too, Jesus walking around referring to my father, and like the Mosaic tradition, and yet there was a sense in which. Jesus fulfilled the law, but also there's a prima facie sense in which, you have heard it was said, love your friend, your neighbor, and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love him and bless him who curses you, and things like that. And so there was a sense in which Jesus was taking what, Moses had said and then upgrading it, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. I mean, in my silly atheist head, it's all narrative and mythology, but I am attracted by the notion that the Old Testament is paternal lessons given to a small child to keep him from doing really, really bad things. And that the New Testament is more like demonstrated for an adolescent, something like about the proper way of being or something like that.
One way I summed it up, I said it better. I'll try to, this is the gist of it, but I said it in a cool way. But it was something like, in the Old Testament, God listed all of the rules for living perfectly. And then in the New Testament, he became a man and said, now let me show you how.
Yeah, like that. Yeah. So it's all pretty simple. We'll just send him an email over there in the Middle East, right? And it'll be all done. As we start to wind down, there were a couple other things I wanted to just quickly point out in the video that we didn't get to play. And again, I think this is well worth you just watching the whole 2 hour and whatever it is conversation. But I loved it when Bret Weinstein explained the virtue, evolutionarily speaking, of like small talk even. Mm-hmm. Like, why is it that over and over in human history, we've got this custom where when two people meet, or especially two strangers meet, hey, how you doing? Nice weather, isn't it? Mm-hmm. What do you think's going to happen with the blobbity bloobity blah? And it all seems so stupid, and yet we all keep doing it. Mm-hmm. And he's like, no, it serves a perfect function. It's a psychopath detector. Mm-hmm. Is this person playing the same civilizational game that you are? Do they know the lingo? Do they know the norms? Can you turn your back on them? Or do you need to shuffle away and reach for a hefty rock so you don't have to crack him over the head or something? Yeah. It's a way to, it's like a quick acid test. Are you one of us, or are you something else? Something like, because you can get weird responses to how's the weather, right? And you'll know you're dealing with a serial killer.
Yeah. It's like Louis Armstrong said, when you say, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you.
I love you. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I did really like that. And I thought there was some other angle he had on that too, but now it escapes me. But because, they got into some stuff too, where Tucker was like, I mean, how do we just know? Like sometimes you just know there's something, they're 100 miles away. And and he got into the intuition.
Yeah, Tucker was insisting that that's God telling you or something like that.
Or at least they're supernatural. Yeah.
Right. And Bret was trying to come up with all the weird things that we know before it bubbles up into our neocortex, and the narrator in our brain that we identify as ourselves says, I now have a thought and I think danger is coming. We must run. Mm-hmm. And he said that very, very eloquently, and I'm not going to be able to reproduce it. It's worth going and listen to that conversation.
Yeah, and he went so far as to have because Tucker was, I don't know if Tucker said he's experienced this personally or he's heard people tell stories where he didn't think they were lying about, you're on a road trip and all of a sudden you just know that your 18-year-old kid got in a car accident or something. Like, you just know. And then so Bret was trying to do like the naturalistic explanation about, like, oh, my wife knows me very well and we can be separated, and if I was supposed to check in with her and I didn't, then she can da-da-da. And
Tucker was,
it was a bit contrived, but I did like what Bret was trying to do.
Yeah, Tucker was fishing for ESP or something supernatural like that, and Bret came up with a admittedly contrived explanation of, yes, my wife knows me and my patterns perfectly well, and if X and Y and Z happened, she would know something is going on, and there's no way in the world she could know. And yeah, I like that. I like to frame it as intuition better, just because that's one, I don't care about ESP. Two, I like the if you think these things can only come from God whispering in your ear, it's nice to say, well, it could be something else. It could be these intuitions coming from parts of our brain that are a lot deeper than our consciousness, which, as he says in this conversation, is very, very new on the scene, evolutionarily speaking. Until our species came along, there was nothing like human consciousness. It was, whatever it is to be a bear or a deer or a Wolverine or whatever. Which is interesting.
I'm toying with sharing an anecdote. Now that I said this, I have to. What's funny is what's making me hesitate is not because I'm worried about atheists making fun of me. I'm worried about Christians lecturing me. And so here's the story, is that sometimes if I have a moral dilemma, I will pray and just say, all right, I'm going to just open the Bible. And if there's something you want me to know, then you just lead me. And it has happened on at least, let's call it 7 occasions where the verse that I'm just, quote, randomly opening up and reading is so intricately tailored to give me exactly the answer in my that it freaks me out. And
you ever try it with a fortune cookie?
No. And so anyway, it's enough that I'm telling you it could, and it's not that, I do it every day and then I only remember the 7 times it works. It's not that either.
Right. I got you. I do think,
but let me just say, so to me, it's like, there's God, or you could say, well, no, Bob, because you've read the Bible and then you're subconscious. And I say, okay, but if I actually know the Bible and I actually can also, I'm such a card shark that I can open it to the passage without even trying, and just boom, it's right there. You know what I mean? Because that's the thing too. Like, it's not just me knowing, really what I want is Leviticus 12. It's like, I have to know how to open the Bible. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm saying, if we really are capable of doing that stuff, and maybe we are, then okay, but isn't that what Bret was getting at? That you really have no idea what you're capable of in like the intuition and blah, 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 and ESP. And it's just, that's one way of describing it. And there is a baseball game. It's not that there isn't a baseball game if we could explain it in terms of lower order things. And
that's very cool.
Anyway.
I have 2 comments that are tangentially related. Well, I guess the first is pretty closely related. I do think that the Bible is such a text that, and it's, hyperlinked and a little repetitive. There's a decent chance, like, it would be really impressive if it was War and Peace. The fact that it's a Bible, there's probably a lot of useful phrases for whatever you were struggling with. And the second thing is just the value in an atheist perspective for prayer. I do think people are helped when they pray, because at the very, very least, even if there is no divine supernatural God helping you. You are focusing your will and your efforts and your interest. You change your perceptions by praying about something, like praying to hit the lottery or get a ride on a purple unicorn probably won't help. But if you pray to fix your relationship with your children and be better at your job, well, then you are reorienting your focus and your will and your perceptions to seek things, to see things that will help you in those endeavors in a way that if you didn't do that, if you didn't crystallize your aim, as Jordan Peterson would say, then you're going to continue blithering along and being blind to the things that could help you achieve your goals. So prayer is just focused thought, or even if it is only focused thought, it's very useful.
Yeah. For example, I have a prayer group with some of the guys at my job, and, it's a quick thing and we do it. It has occurred to me, even if you didn't believe in that stuff, I mean, we all do believe, but there would be a function of that. And certainly the other people, the company, like if they knew what we were doing, they should be glad we're doing that, because we pray for let's make sure we treat our clients right. You know what I mean? Like it's very useful if, do you know, like 30% of our workforce thinks there's this being that's watching over them. And if they get caught stealing, like the rest of their in-group, it's going to think you're a big hypocrite. You know what I mean? Like that's an extra layer of, this is good. We don't want people thinking, well, if I could get away with it, I would embezzle from the company, So anyway, or overcharge a client or something. If I thought I could get away with it, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we did pretty good, Bob. We're under an hour and a half, and we got through all the clips that we gathered together.
Solved the creation of the universe, baseball games, and peace in the Middle East.
Now, I went through that video and pulled out all these clips, so I'm going to leave it to you to write the email to Tel Aviv and whatever server is still standing in Gaza to solve that Israel-Middle East thing.
I'm getting close in my Bible commentary to cover John 3:16, so I'll just send them that one.
That's what that's all about.
Yeah.
I never looked it up. All right. Well, this was awesome, Bob. Anything else you want to tell the good folks?
Let me say, in case people think, what are you pulling your punches with the Quran? I honestly do not know enough about Islam to comment on that. So it's not that I'm just tiptoeing over that. I just, you know what I mean? Like, because basically it's not like Bret was saying, Islam and Judaism both need the upgrade. And I kind of just talked about Judaism.
Yeah,
I'm not Muslim, so I think they're wrong, but I don't know enough to comment on the particulars.
Yeah,
so I just want to mention
here.
that.
Well, please go to Haman Nature, HAMAN nature.substack.com, or my YouTube channel for the show notes and video links. You can also find them at bobmurphyshow.com. I'd like to thank you, Bob, for another great episode, and thank our listeners for tuning in, including Tucker Carlson and Bret Weinstein. Welcome to the family, guys.
Hey, guys. Don't be strangers.
We'll catch you next time, guys. And thanks, Bob.
Thanks, everybody.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.